So, hello, Jim. It is
Yes.
a honor to speak with you today. Um, I've got a few questions lined up that I think the learners in my class would appreciate to hear them from someone who was actually on the ground in Vietnam fighting in the war. So, before we get to the questions, just introduce yourself to them, who you are, and anything else you would like to add before we get to the formal questions.
Okay. My name is Jim Messinger. I flew helicopters in the Vietnam War. The first tour was in a thing called forgot the name. Uh, and the second tour was in a big sky crane. The Huey was the first one. Second one was sky crane. So two tours in Vietnam flying helicopters and got to see a wonderful number of things and learned quite a bit. I have some questions here that we can go into. I want to clarify things, though, right up front. I'm unusual. I was preparing for this job as a youngster, watching television war movies over and over and over again. I knew exactly what I was getting into, sort of, and I didn't have any issues with the war or the people. Uh, the only issue I had was with our government. So if you want to do your questions.
Yeah. So my first one for you today is how old were you when you joined the war? Did you volunteer to join or were you drafted through the lottery?
I volunteered. I was 19 and I was in college. My grades had dropped a little bit and I was going to be drafted if I didn't go join up. So I went down to the local area and enlisted. Some 6 months or 10 months later, I was in the Army in formation, and the sergeant brought over a letter that was sent to me, and it was my draft notice. You see
So
how
what
efficient
went
our government is.
what went through your mind when you realized you were now actually going to war as a 19-year-old boy?
I was looking forward to every bit of it. I had never flown a helicopter, of course, but I knew what helicopters were. I knew what war was all about, or mostly I knew about it. I'd seen every war movie that had ever existed before I went to join the army, and I knew enough about military service to not join the army. You needed to be in something a little safer than that. Unfortunately, I was in the army as a helicopter pilot.
So how prepared did you feel when you first arrived in Vietnam, given how young and inexperienced you were?
Well, I was ready for just about everything. Of course, you can never be ready for everything because more things happen. Just a good example of that would be the Tet. Uh, I was there for the Tet affair, and it was quite an awesome evening. The enemy was attacking in force all over the country, and we were out killing them. But we were very successful in my area, in my unit. We were very successful in fighting off the enemy, and none of us got hurt.
Like, can you describe the moment when it really hit you that you were now in a war and death is just around the corner if you have one misstep or lean too far to the left or to the right?
My first job, when I got to Vietnam, my first job was to fly around in a helicopter and let people shoot at me. Does that help you any about my attitude? Later, I got a job that allowed us to shoot back. but we had to make them shoot at us. We weren't allowed to shoot until.
Walgreens drugs.
Oh, great. That was kind of scary. Walgreens drugs butted in. Okay, are you still with me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Um, well, the rules of engagement required us to not just identify the enemy, but be attacked by the enemy, and then we could shoot back. And that's how the government decided to fight the war.
So, what was the hardest thing to adjust to as a young soldier, given you weren't, that wasn't really a job you wanted to get into for the rest of your life? It was a war and you were drafted into it after you volunteered.
Yeah, and again, I was prepared for everything from all my television shows and studying. I was in the Civil Air Patrol, which is an Air Force auxiliary for teenagers. I spent my entire teenage years in playing Air Force. Uh, I knew everything about the Army as well, and I was absolutely certain I didn't want to be in the Army as an infantryman because those people live very dangerously. It's a whole new world. The helicopter business is a lot safer. So I made sure I got into the right field. And of course, most people will tell you that it is kind of dangerous when you're flying around and people are shoot at you, but that's the way it works. There's lots of things you can do to not get shot, like you can shoot back or you can run.
You mentioned you were in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. However, you
Yes.
weren't involved with the helicopter. Can you tell us a bit more about being on the ground? How did that day go, as it was a unexpected attack by the Viet Cong?
Yes. It was a very impressive thing, as I learned years later, and I talked to people about it in the museum. The North Vietnamese were way up in the north, and they planned a battle to attack every major city in Vietnam simultaneously the night of Tet, midnight. They actually sent some teams out to find all the helicopters they could and blow them up because they were going to attack across flat ground, and the only cover they had was rice paddies. So I didn't get to fly that night. We only had 2 helicopters flyable, gunships, and the guys flew out there and started killing people. They had, again, no cover. These are Vietnamese infantry guys, and they're running through the rice paddies, and there's a helicopter with 3 guns on it, automatic gunfire for 3 different people, and just mowing them down like a lawnmower. They ran out of ammunition, came back and refueled and rearmed and went back out and gave it some more. We got credit for killing a battalion of the enemy that night, my little unit. And that happened everywhere up and down the country. Our press, the United States press, decided that it was the worst failure the American Army has ever had, and the government believed that story. In fact, we annihilated their entire military force that night, and many years later, the head general from Vietnam came to the United States and was interviewed by people in the States and asked, what could we have done better? And he said, if you had come across the border into the North the day after the battle, we would have surrendered in a week or 2. They had no military force left after that battle. But our media decided it was different. They didn't ask the generals. They didn't even ask Jim.
How did you cope with fear and uncertainty on a daily basis as the war in Vietnam was pretty similar to the war in Japan, where one small step to the left and you land into a deadly trap that kills you instantly.
Well, it wasn't like that where I was stationed. We lived in a tent, 20 helicopter pilots, one tent, and we flew every day. Well, not everybody flew every day, but pretty much we flew every day. We flew 1,000 hours in a year in helicopter, and we got a mortar attack one night. We're living in tents now, and the enemy attacked with mortars, which is a long distance weapon for them. And it woke me up when the first one hit, and I went back to sleep. And the lieutenant came by and told me to get up and get to cover. I told him I was tired, and I just laid back down and went back to sleep. So again, I tell people at the museum and tell my students when I was teaching, I'm crazy. Yes. I had a good time. I didn't get hurt. I lost some friends. And that's one of the things that you have to accustom yourself to. If you don't, and we had lots and lots and lots of people that had no idea what war was. And then when they got into the terrible parts of it, they just couldn't stand it. I understood all of the things about wars, learned a few more, by the way. So I just always apologize because I didn't have problems. I did my job. I didn't kill very many people either. So, and the other thing is, consider the infantry. They go face to face with guns in hands to kill people. Helicopter pilots fly around way above the sky and very seldom get out of the helicopter. So it's a different world. It's not easy to kill people, but you can learn. And I say that there are people who can't learn that. It's just too hard for many people.
For you, what was a typical day like when you weren't up in the air in the helicopters?
What was it like up in the helicopter?
No, on the ground when you weren't in the helicopters. So it's a
Oh,
normal day-to-day life.
yeah, we were never. Uh, we did get mortared twice altogether in our unit, but when we were in our home, we were pretty safe. We were surrounded by infantry and people that could defend the position, so we didn't have to put up with a lot of getting shot at.
Now, did friendships with your fellow soldiers help you get through this experience? Because soldiers often form very close relationships where if you see your best friend die in front of you, they take you out of the war because you cannot function normally anymore.
Yes, that happens to some people, and there are people now that are still locked up from the war. And if I can get them to the museum, I can usually help get them started down that trail. But again, you put people into a war that have no idea what it's all about, and then they get the worst job, infantry, and they go in the worst places and do the worst things. It's not easy to overcome that. I didn't have any problems, so I didn't have to get over anything.
So how did the war change you as a person? Because many soldiers, the person they were before the war, it's erased from history. That person doesn't exist anymore.
People are forced to do terrible things, and they didn't know they were going to have to do terrible things, and it's very difficult for them to get that out of their mind. Again, I didn't have that problem, so I try to help people, and I have helped some people out of that. But I watched war movies my entire teenage years and after. I studied war. I studied weapons. I knew how to use weapons, and the helicopter was a great improvement over being an infantryman. So I had it easy.
So my last question for you today is, what do you wish people understood about the young men who went to Vietnam, who didn't know the politics because they are in Vietnam, they don't know what's going on at home with the government and how they were vilified when they returned from the war?
I don't know how to make it happen, but the people at home need to understand what those infantry guys or those military guys, if you want to expand it, but those guys are doing bad things. An ordinary person in the United States doesn't like to kill people. We have some crazy people running around shooting every day, killing people, but the normal person just doesn't like that kind of attitude. You need to the civilians that stayed at home and don't know anything about war need to find out about war and find out about what those people had to do to stay alive. And many times it wasn't pretty.
So thank you very much, Jim, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you and letting you tell your story to my learners who will be starting Vietnam soon, or by the time I show them this, they would have already started with it and learned about the Tet Offensive. So thank you very much for giving them the clearer picture of someone that was on the ground on that day that the Tet happened.